So it's autumn in Michigan, and that means two things. One of them is an inexplicable 90-degree weather. The other one is that the leaves are starting to change color. The color-changing leaves got me thinking about my favorite camouflage pattern, Flecktarn, and how I wanted to put it on a rifle stock. Now, the typical way to paint Flecktarn on a rifle stock is through the use of stencils. Whether they're stencils that hold over, they're the negative image, or they're a positive image that are stuck on the rifle and then later removed. I didn't want to go through that process. I thought I could do a little bit better using a pretty typical method of camouflage painting that I've seen online quite a bit, which is sponge painting. So I wanted to try that. The biggest part of it was matching the colors. Now, as you can see, Flecktarn is a 5-color pattern: light green, olive green, dark green, brown, and black. A lot of those are easy to match. Some of the difficulty was finding exactly the right match or the best match possible. Excuse me. I tried on one stock. I didn't quite get the colors right. My dark green was a little too dark and the proportions weren't exactly right. But still, it came out looking pretty good. The colors I eventually chose and went with for the final project are starting off with Camouflage, or Rustoleum's Camouflage color, Army Green. That's sort of a sage green color. Next is their Olive Drab, which they call Deep Forest Green. It's also one of their Camouflage brand paints. Dark Hunter Green, which is a satin sheen rather than the flat of the Camouflage. That shouldn't matter too much because I'm going to go over it with a clear coat that's supposed to be dead flat anyway. Also is Brown. This one is Flat Red Rock. This one was the hardest to match, I think. As you can see, it doesn't totally match the brown of the Camouflage, but it's about the closest I could get. I also used Flat Red Primer. It seemed to work pretty well. It's a little more red though. And finally, black. Flat black is pretty common, but I'm using their Rust-Oleum Camouflage, which is just flat black as well. As for what you're going to be using to actually paint, I'd recommend using a natural sea sponge. This one, as you can see, has been used for 3 different colors so far. It's probably been used for more. The other colors have just been covering it up. Use a natural one rather than the synthetic sea sponges, or any sort of synthetic sponge. This one's one I ripped apart, but I don't know if you can see the difference in texture here. But the natural sea sponge leaves a lot more defined points as opposed to this one, which is just sort of a smear. It also has a lot of straight lines, which aren't necessarily bad in camouflage, but at the same time, it's not really something you'll see in Flecktarn quite a bit. So we're going to get to work on that. Process I'm not going to show is degreasing the stock. That takes a while. But usually my process for an injected molded plastic stock is to start with brake cleaner, let that dry off, then remove all the flashing with either a sharp knife or some sandpaper or both. Then scuff everything up with a Scotch-Brite pad. I'll talk more about this later as well when you see the final, when you see the stock getting ready to be painted. But we're going to go inside. We're going to start painting. Okay, the stock has been cleaned and prepped. I've done this by degreasing it with brake cleaner, followed by some acetone and a Scotch-Brite pad. I usually use the maroon and then a gray one, just to scuff the surface and make sure I've gotten all the grease off of there, as well as some of the flashing that can be along some of the edges. Some of the flashing needed a utility knife to pare it down, but right now we're ready to paint. I've got everything taped off that I don't want paint sticking to, including the Chief Lane Bear logo on the grip cap and the bearing surfaces of the action screws and action itself. I'm not too worried about the other inletting. Usually the tolerances are pretty loose, that paint isn't going to harm them that much anyway. First step on this is going to be to lay down one smooth, complete coat with your light green color. In this case I'm using Rustoleum Camouflage Army Green. I think I mentioned before. Seems to be about the best color. I did a previous one, looked pretty good as well, using this Krylon Avocado, so my fellow millennials will probably like that. But either one works well. I tend to like to not mix my paint brands just for compatibility's sake. But I'm going to hit it with the light green color, and we'll move to the next step after that. Okay, so I've got a nice clean coat of the light green color on here. I'm going to leave this to flash over for about 10-15 minutes, maybe 20, depending on the humidity and temperature. You've heard that I got a fan going in here. Part of that's for ventilation, part of that's to speed up the drying time. of the paint. Obviously it's going to take several days to cure, but I want to get it to a point where it's dry enough to touch with a sponge and it won't peel off the green paint that's already been laid down, so I can start putting on my other colors. But I'm going to leave this out here for 10 to 15 minutes just to flash off the solvent and the carrier, so I'm going to the next step. So this is flashed over, it's ready to go for the next one. It's going to be the olive drab coat is going to be next, and it's essentially the same sponge painting technique you've probably seen in other YouTube channels and other videos. Just we're going to be working more on the different layers and the different color palette. So the next one I'm going to be using is an olive drab green. Like I said, this is Rustoleum's Camouflage. They call it deep forest green, but it's pretty much olive drab. Doing the same technique you've seen, like I said, spraying it onto a paper plate, and then using a sponge. In this case, got a natural sea sponge. I think this is called sea wool, the particular variety. I keep one for green, one for brown, and one for black. That way I don't mix up my colors too much when I'm actually painting. But we're going to start doing that right now. Oh, and the proportion on this one is about 20% of the overall color coat. So the light green that's on here right now only makes up about 10% of the overall color. So this next one is going to go on a little bit heavier. I'm not going to block out the entire one because I've still got 3 other colors to put on. And the other colors are going to go over top of it, so it's just a matter of mixing things up, using your eye to figure out what looks best that will break up the outline of the stock. Okay, that layer's on. I'm going to give this another 10 minutes to flash over before I put the dark green color on. The plate I'll probably reuse, but one thing I learned just now about sponging is that the old sponging doesn't pick up paint very well, so you got to get to a new side, which means that sponges are a diminishing resource unless you clean them off, which frankly I'm not going to be bothered to do. But like I said, 10 more minutes on this. Put the next coat on, fill in some of the mist areas or the light green areas. A little bit more. This darker green color is also going to cover up some of the olive drab as well, because the darker green color goes for about 40% of the overall color. Last coat is sort of flashed over. I'm going to go to the dark green color. The dark green color is going to be the most common color on here, about 30 to 40%. I'd say 40% is what I'm shooting for. Same process as before. Alright, so this color was Rustoleum Dark Hunter Green. I tried using another color on a previous iteration, this Charleston Green, which you can tell by the cap color is almost black how dark it is. That worked alright, but I think this is going to give me the better match to the original Flecktarn. So yeah, the coat's gone on here. You can see it's a lot heavier than the other one. It's covering up a lot of the olive drab green, which is normal. It's what exactly what you'd expect. But I'm going to let this go, flash over for another 10 minutes before I put on my next color, which is going to be the brown, which is sort of a reddish brown, and I'll talk more about the paint in just a moment. Ready for the next step, and this one's going to be the brown. The color I'm using on this one is called Flat Red Rock by Rustoleum. In previous patterns, I just used Flat Red Primer. Worked just as well. As you can see, the color is almost identical. This one's a little bit more red. But either way, I'm going to apply this. My strategy here, I should have mentioned before, I'm not going to be targeting the light green areas. I still want the light green to show through in most places. Plus I've still got one more color, black, to apply after this one. But we're going to go ahead and start off with the brown. Okay, so the brown's on here now. Got a pretty good breakup to the entire pattern. The black is really going to tie it together. The black is just going to be sort of dabbed here and there throughout. Brown is going to be about 20% of the overall color scheme. Black is just going to be another 10%, and that's going to be used to break up sort of the edges between the brown and the green, and just sort of decorate any sort of, not decorate, cover up any sort of big light green splotches that might still be showing through. But once again, we'll give it another 10 minutes, and then hit it with the black, and that'll be it before we go to clear coat. Last color is black. This is all flashed over, ready to go. Black is just going to be used to break up any big areas of color I still have in here. Big areas like the big dark green splotch here, got some big red areas here, or brown I should say, areas there. Not focusing on areas of light green, because light green is still, it's probably about the right percentage of the overall color right now. But anywhere there's a large spot of one color, I'm just going to use the black to sort of break it up, provide some contrast between it and the color right next to it. So the big areas, and then any sort of border that I feel might need a little bit of black. It's more of an art or a feel rather than a science to it. The black should only account for about 10% of the overall color scheme. Alright, looking pretty good. Last thing to do is going to be to clear coat it. As you can see here, I had some trouble with my sponge. I used a different side. For whatever reason, gave this sort of almost triangular shape printed on there, which I didn't want to do too many times and get that pattern repeating itself. So I flipped the sponge back to another side and used that to paint, and it turned out okay. It's a little more black than I would have liked down here, but it is what it is so far. Make sure when you're painting you also get the top rails. So now I'm going to give it one more 10-minute period to just flash off, and then I hit it with the clear coat and should be ready to go after that. Okay, time for the last coat, and that's going to be the clear coat using Rustoleum Clear Dead Flat. It's never going to be as flat as the flat camouflage paints or the flat colored paints, but this is one of the better ones when it comes to keeping the gloss level low. But yeah, we're coming up on an hour that the first coat went on, which is what Rust-Oleum usually recommends to coat within the first hour, or after 24 or 72 or whatever the case may be. I don't want to wait that long, so I'm going to put this last one on and set it aside to dry and cure for almost a week.
Oh, for God's sake!
Okay, so here's our finished product, and I think it looks pretty good. It doesn't look exactly like the original Flecktarn. I didn't think that was really an option using the sponge I was using, but at the same time, it came out looking very good. The same layering of colors, the same proportions of colors. The splotches aren't the same size. Obviously, that's the biggest problem here. But at the same time, it looks really good. It sort of affects the look and could be pretty effective in the field. But it came out looking good, and that's the important thing. I was really going for the look more than any sort of effectiveness. I don't really know the effectiveness of Flecktarn. I know Germany's used it since the 70s or 80s. And it, or variations of it, have been used by other nations around the world. So it's got to have something going for it, I would think, to be that popular. It can be changed depending on your circumstances as well. Those of you living in an arid environment, probably wouldn't benefit from the multiple greens. They might look for something browner, tanner. There is actually a tan camouflage for desert use that Germany's developed, and other countries that have more arid environments may have something similar. It's just a matter of matching whatever colors you want with the colors that are available in terms of spray paint. Spray paint is being used here rather than other paints because it dries so quickly. You could use other paints, tempera paints, acrylic paints. The problem is you're going to have to wait for them to dry. So with spray paint, they'll flash off, in about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit more or less depending on your atmosphere at the time. But the other paints you actually have to let dry so you don't pull them up when you apply the next round. But as I mentioned, the different colors are different for different situations. Here's one I did, it's sort of an urban Spongeflage or Spongetarn. More of a gray, blue, black, some brown and green in there. But this is when I actually did the whole rifle and scope. So yeah, it's adaptable. Whatever it is you're looking for in terms of colors, you can sort of adapt this to using the same tools, same techniques, and then applying it in a way that's similar. This one, black went on a little heavier, for example, but it still went on last. The lightest color, the gray, went on first, and it's still about 10% of the overall color coverage. So it's there you go. It's a matter of just matching it to whatever it is you're looking to do. I'm not an expert on camouflage. I don't know how effective it is, but it looks like it's something that could work out well, depending on your circumstances. I mean, it costs a lot less than hydro dipping. If you don't have the spray paints on hand, which I did, it may cost a little bit more, but the sponges themselves are pretty cheap. I think I got all 3 of those sponges for under $10. So something like hydro dipping, something like stencils, do the cost analysis, see what works best for you, and let me know what you think. As always, leave questions in the comments below, or message me, and anywhere you find Dr. Thunder 88. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching.